science that determined that global warming and climate change were real, and now it's science that's determined that the Republican Party is full of stuffy old men. Earlier today, the Republican National Committee released its wide-ranging autopsy report called the Growth and Opportunity Project Report. In it, the party admits to several shortcomings that contributed to the party's wide losses in the 2012 election. A portion of the report includes market research from voter focus groups around the country. And not surprisingly, when asked to describe Republicans, respondents said that the party was, quote, scary, narrow-minded, out of touch, and full of stuffy old men. Yeah, they use those phrases. Of course, one of the issues that the Republican Party is most out of touch with Americans on is climate change. According to the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication, as of last March, 68% of Americans believed that global warming was happening and, at least in part, caused by humans, while only 14% believed that global warming did not exist. But don't tell that to Republicans, who to this day are still adamant that climate change is a big phony lie, despite the mountains of studies and reports proving otherwise. And it's that willful ignorance that's largely to blame for Americans increasingly labeling the Republican Party as the party of narrow-minded, stuffy old men. But it didn't always used to be like this in the Republican Party, and it doesn't have to stay this way. Believe it or not, there was a time in America when Republicans cared about the environment and enacted legislation to protect it. During the presidential campaign of 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush ran on a platform of being an environmental president and presented the passage of the Clean Air Act as a major campaign issue. At the time of the 1988 presidential campaign, air pollution, smog was on the rise across our country, and acid rain was a major threat not only to our environment, but to our infrastructure. 3 weeks after being elected president, George H.W. Bush addressed a joint session of Congress and, referencing the growing threat of acid rain in America at that time, told the democratically controlled Congress that, quote, the time for study alone has passed and the time for action is now. Acid rain is caused by emissions of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, which react with ultraviolet light and water molecules in the upper atmosphere to produce acids, particularly sulfuric acid and nitric acid. Besides harming animals, soil, and vegetation, acid rain also damages buildings, cars, and even was dissolving older buildings and statues. President Bush and the senior pushed for and got a cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide and other emissions, which is still in use today. Thanks to George H.W. Bush's cap-and-trade efforts, emissions of 6 common pollutants were down 41% between 1990 and 2008, and emissions of sulfur dioxide, one of the main causes of acid rain, are down more than 50% since 1990. It's clear that in the past, Republicans put their best foot forward to help our environment and our planet. So what's changed? Well, for starters, there's floating around in politics today more money than there was in the late 80s and early 90s. During the 2012 election cycle, Big Oil made nearly $71 million in campaign contributions, 90% of which went to Republicans. During the 1990 election cycle, Big Oil made only $11 million in campaign contributions. Only 62% of that went to Republicans. So clearly, the amount of money going to Republicans from Big Oil is one of the largest driving forces behind the party's climate change denial. But buried in the history of the Republican Party is some semblance of care for our environment and for the planet. And if Republicans are truly committed to rebranding themselves and attracting a larger base, then addressing the climate change crisis would be a great place to start. RNC Committee Chairman Reince Priebus spoke earlier today about the results of the Growth and Opportunity Report. Take a listen.
If there's one message I want everyone to take away from here, it's this. We know that we have problems, we've identified them, and we're implementing the solutions to fix them.
Well, Reince will be waiting for you to right the ship. But in the meantime, it's time for Republicans to say no to big oil and to make embracing the greatest threat our nation and planet have ever seen part of their solution to becoming a viable party once again. After all, if it worked for them once, it can work for them again. And it will be better for American democracy and for all life on planet Earth, for the Republican Party to return to some semblance of sanity.